Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into the world of modern military operations. And trust me, this isn't just about, guns and tanks. We've got a stack of excerpts here from ADP 30. That's the U.S. Army's Doctrine on Operations. And let me tell you, it's way more thought-provoking than it sounds.
Oh, yeah.
Get ready to go beyond the headlines. We're going to unpack how armies actually operate in a world where the lines are blurry, the problems are multifaceted, and winning is a whole lot more complicated than it used to be.
I'm intrigued.
We're even going to tackle some seriously intriguing concepts like what's the difference between destroying an enemy and disintegrating them, and how does the game change when you're fighting amongst a population, not just against an army on an empty battlefield.
Yeah.
Plus, there's this fascinating idea of campaign quality, which is all about more than just winning battles. It's about the ability to keep going, adapt, and achieve those long-term goals.
Interesting.
To guide us through this complex terrain, we've got an expert who can distill this dense doctrine into clear, understandable insights.
Well, do my best.
So when I first skimmed these excerpts, I have to admit I was struck by how the Army seems to consider practically everything under the sun when it comes to planning operations. It's not just about military force, right?
You're absolutely right. The document emphasizes how interwoven everything is in modern military operations. They call this the operational environment. And it includes political factors, economic influences, the local population's social structures, information networks, infrastructure, the physical terrain, and even time itself.
Wait, hold on, even time. I'm picturing a general checking his watch, but I'm guessing it's a bit more strategic than that. What makes time so important in military thinking?
You hit the nail on the head with strategic. See, time is a resource just like manpower or ammunition. Commanders have to think about the duration of an operation, the pace of events, that's the tempo, and how the entire situation might shift as time goes on. They're not just looking for a quick win, they're aiming for lasting success. And that takes careful consideration of how things might change over time.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's be honest, things rarely go according to plan, especially in a rapidly changing environment. And then you've got this concept of a hybrid threat, which honestly sounds a little sci-fi to me at first glance. What exactly is a hybrid threat?
Thankfully, no robots are involved, at least not yet.
Okay, good.
Think of a hybrid threat as a blend of different actors all working towards the same goal. Regular armies, guerrilla forces, terrorist groups, and even criminal elements. It's like a messy cocktail of adversaries, all with different motives and methods.
Okay, so no robots, but still a bit of a headache, right? Because how do you even know who the enemy is in that kind of situation? It seems like defining your objective would be incredibly difficult.
You've hit on a crucial point. That blurring of lines is a defining characteristic of modern conflict. It makes the operational environment even more complex, and it requires different approaches than simply throwing military force at the problem.
It seems like the Army's role is becoming much more multifaceted. I noticed the document outlines 4 main strategic roles for the Army, not just the expected combat-focused one. It's almost like they're trying to be proactive rather than just reactive.
Exactly. The Army's role is evolving to match the complexity of the modern world. Those 4 roles are shaping operational environments, preventing conflict, prevailing in large-scale ground combat, and consolidating gains. Each one plays a crucial part in achieving those strategic objectives.
Let's break those down because they each seem pretty nuanced. First up, shaping operational environments. Does that even involve fighting? It sounds almost diplomatic in nature.
It can be. Think of it as laying the groundwork for success before a conflict even emerges. It might involve things like security cooperation with other countries, building up the capacity of partner forces, or even just having a visible presence in strategically important regions. The goal is to deter aggression and to build relationships that can prevent things from escalating into violence.
So almost like building a solid foundation to prevent the house from collapsing in the first place.
Exactly. It's about anticipating potential problems and addressing them before they spiral out of control. Then you have preventing conflict, which sounds pretty straightforward. But I'm curious how the Army actually does that. Is it all about just showing up with a big stick? While a credible and prepared military force does act as a deterrent, preventing conflict is also about proactive engagement. It's about sending a clear message to potential adversaries that the costs of aggression would outweigh any potential gains. This might involve mobilizing troops, deploying units strategically, conducting military exercises, and basically making it clear that any aggressive action will be met with a firm response.
So it's a combination of strength and diplomacy, working to maintain a balance of power to avoid conflict altogether.
Precisely. It's about deterring aggression while simultaneously exploring peaceful solutions. Now, of course, you have the fighting role, or as the document puts it, prevailing in large-scale ground combat. That's the one most people imagine when they think of the Army, right? Tanks rolling across a battlefield, troops engaging in firefights. But how is this different from, say, the wars of the past? Technology is a game changer, no doubt. But a more fundamental difference is the recognition that even in large-scale combat, you're operating within a complex environment with multiple actors. It's not just two armies slugging it out on an open field anymore.
So even in the midst of a full-blown conflict, there's still that need to consider the bigger picture, the political and social ramifications, the long-term consequences. It's not just about winning battles, but about winning the peace as well.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final role, consolidating gains. I'm picturing a video game where you have to secure the territory you just captured. Is that close? You're closer than you think. Consolidating gains is about ensuring that any victory achieved is lasting and meaningful. It involves stabilizing the situation, establishing security, rebuilding infrastructure, and supporting the development of a functioning society. In essence, it's about transforming a military victory into a lasting peace.
So it's about making sure that once the fighting stops, the situation doesn't revert back to chaos and instability. It's about creating the conditions for a sustainable peace.
You got it. It's like building a bridge from conflict to peace, making sure it's strong enough to support the weight of a new future.
I'm starting to see a recurring theme here. It seems like the Army's approach is all about recognizing that conflict isn't just about brute force. It's about understanding the entire operational environment, the political landscape, the social dynamics, the economic factors, and tailoring your approach accordingly.
That's one of the key takeaways from this deep dive. Modern military operations demand a deep understanding of the strategic landscape. It's not just about winning battles, it's about shaping the entire situation to achieve your goals, and that requires a flexible and adaptive approach.
So it's about understanding that every conflict is unique, every situation is different, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Precisely. It's about adapting to the complexities of the 21st century world, and understanding that achieving lasting peace requires a holistic approach that goes beyond just military force.
This is incredibly insightful stuff. We've barely scratched the surface. But it's already clear that the Army's playbook is evolving to match the complexity of the modern world. When we come back, we'll continue our deep dive, exploring more of these fascinating concepts and how they translate into real-world action. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. We've been exploring how the Army's approach to operations is evolving to meet the challenges of the 21st century. It's not just about firepower anymore. It's about understanding the entire operational environment and adapting your strategies accordingly.
Right, and I think that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're going beyond the simplistic view of war and getting into the strategic thinking behind modern military operations. One of the things that really caught my eye was this idea of expeditionary capability. It sounds like the Army is aiming to be more agile and flexible, kind of like special forces.
You're picking up on an important shift. Expeditionary capability is about being able to deploy rapidly anywhere in the world and hit the ground running. It demands a specific mindset, a focus on intense training and readiness, and the ability to project force effectively in a variety of environments.
But getting there quickly is only half the battle, right? What good is speed if you can't sustain yourself once you're there? I imagine logistics must play a huge role.
You're spot on. That's where campaign quality comes into play. It's the other side of the expeditionary coin. Think of it as the ability to go the distance, to sustain operations for as long as it takes, adapt to unexpected twists and turns, and ultimately achieve those long-term goals. It's like the difference between sprinting and running a marathon.
Okay, I can see that. You need to be able to pace yourself for the long haul. But how does the Army actually build that campaign quality into its forces? Is it just a matter of having enough supplies?
It goes far beyond just stockpiling supplies. It starts with the very structure of the force, having units that are organized, trained, and equipped for sustained operations. But it also comes down to leadership. Leaders who understand the importance of pacing their troops, managing resources wisely, fostering resilience, and adapting to unexpected challenges are crucial for maintaining campaign quality.
So it's not just about physical endurance, it's also about mental and logistical preparedness. It's about having the systems in place to keep going even when the situation gets tough.
Exactly. And remember, these operations can sometimes last for years, even decades. It's about having the stamina to see it through. Now, shifting gears a bit, I was really intrigued by how the Army thinks about different types of areas within an overall operation. It's almost like they're strategically dividing the battle space into zones, each with its own distinct purpose.
I see what you mean.
That's a great way to visualize it. It's called the Army Operational Framework, and it helps commanders organize and understand their operations by dividing the battle space into four main areas: deep, close, support, and consolidation.
Okay, let's break those down, starting with the deep area. I'm picturing something like behind enemy lines, a bit like a spy movie.
It's not necessarily about literal depth, though, that can certainly be a factor. The deep area is where commanders are looking to shape the conditions for future success. Even if that success is playing out closer to their own forces, it's about proactively influencing the environment to your advantage.
So what kind of actions might take place in the deep area? Is it all covert ops and sabotage?
It could be a lot of things. It might involve disrupting the enemy's ability to move reserves, or preventing them from using long-range weapons effectively, or it could involve targeting their logistics, communication networks, or even their recruitment efforts. It's about anticipating future threats and taking action to neutralize them before they can cause serious problems.
So it's almost a preemptive strike, but not in the traditional sense. It's about setting the stage for success before the main event even begins.
You've got it. It's about thinking ahead, about shaping the battlefield to your advantage
Yeah.
before the enemy can even react. Now, contrast that with the close area, which I'm guessing is where well, close combat happens.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Exactly. The close area is where the bulk of your combat power is concentrated. It's where you're directly engaging the enemy, maneuvering your forces, employing firepower, and trying to achieve decisive results. This is where the action is. The front lines, so to speak.
So we're talking about those classic images of warfare tanks rolling, troops engaging in firefights, but I imagine it's not limited to that kind of conventional combat.
Right. Modern warfare rarely unfolds on those neat, open battlefields. The close area could be a dense urban environment, a rugged mountain range, a jungle, even cyberspace. The key point is that it's where the most intense fighting is likely to happen, demanding quick thinking and adaptability from commanders and soldiers alike.
And then there's the support area. I imagine this is the logistical hub where all the supplies, reinforcements, and behind-the-scenes operations are happening. It's like the backbone of the entire operation.
That's a big part of it. But the support area is more than just logistics. It encompasses all the functions that enable your forces to operate effectively. We're talking maintenance, medical care, personnel management, communication networks, and even things like legal support and religious services. It's about ensuring that soldiers have what they need to do their jobs and maintain their morale.
It's like the unsung hero, working tirelessly behind the scenes to keep everything running smoothly. You can't fight effectively if your troops are exhausted, demoralized, or lacking essential supplies.
Exactly. A well-functioning support area is critical for sustaining operations over the long term. And finally, we have the consolidation area. This is where those temporary gains are transformed into lasting stability.
So this is where the focus shifts from fighting to rebuilding, right? It's about making sure that once an area is secured, it doesn't slip back into chaos and conflict.
You nailed it. It's about creating a secure environment, reestablishing governance, rebuilding essential infrastructure, and supporting the development of a functioning and self-sufficient society. Ultimately, it's about transitioning control to civilian authorities or partner forces who can maintain stability and prevent the enemy from regaining a foothold.
It's fascinating to see how the Army strategically divides the battle space like this. It really highlights the complexity of modern military operations and the need for a multifaceted approach that goes beyond just winning battles.
It's about understanding that achieving lasting success requires a comprehensive strategy that addresses not just the immediate military objectives, but also the long-term political, social, and economic factors that contribute to instability and conflict.
It's like a complex puzzle where all the pieces need to fit together to create a complete picture. But this is all still pretty conceptual, right? How does this actually play out in a real operation?
That's where the art of command comes in. Skilled commanders use this framework to visualize the flow of the operation. They might focus on disrupting enemy forces in the deep area to create an opportunity for an offensive in the close area. At the same time, they're making sure the support area is running smoothly to keep the troops supplied and ready to fight. And they're already planning for how to consolidate their gains in the consolidation area.
So it's about coordinating all these different elements, recognizing how actions in one area can influence the situation in another. It's about anticipating challenges, adapting to changes, and always keeping the bigger picture in mind.
Exactly. It's like conducting an orchestra, where each section plays its part to create a harmonious whole. But in this case, the stakes are much higher, and the consequences of a missed note can be far more severe.
We've been talking a lot about strategy and conceptual frameworks, but let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How does the Army actually generate the power it needs to carry out these complex operations? What tools are in their toolbox, so to speak?
The doctrine outlines 8 elements of combat power: leadership and information, and then 6 warfighting functions: command and control, movement and maneuver, intelligence, fires, sustainment, and protection. These elements represent the capabilities and activities that enable the Army to achieve its objectives.
Okay, that's a lot to digest. Let's start with leadership and information. Why are these considered elements of combat power alongside things like tanks and artillery? It seems like an unconventional approach.
Because in modern warfare, battles are often won as much by minds as by machines. Strong leadership is essential for inspiring troops, building trust, fostering initiative, and making effective decisions under immense pressure. And information, or more precisely, the ability to control and shape information, is becoming increasingly critical in today's battle space.
So it's not just about having the most advanced weapons, it's about having the right mindset, the right information, and the right leadership to guide the troops through those complex and often chaotic situations.
You're absolutely right. It's about understanding that the human element, the psychological aspect of warfare, is just as important as the technological aspect. But having information is only useful if you can process it, analyze it, and use it to inform your actions. And that's where the command and control warfighting function comes in.
So command and control is all about coordinating your forces, making those critical decisions, and issuing orders effectively, right? It's about maintaining order in the midst of chaos.
It goes beyond simply giving orders. Command and control is about establishing a clear intent, communicating effectively throughout the chain of command, empowering subordinate leaders to make decisions on the ground, and constantly adapting to the ever-changing situation. In modern warfare, information flows so rapidly and situations can change in the blink of an eye that a rigid top-down approach just won't cut it.
It sounds like flexibility and adaptability are key. You need to be able to make quick decisions based on the best available information and adjust your plans as the situation evolves. It's not about sticking to a rigid script. It's about being able to improvise and respond to the unexpected.
Precisely. And then you have movement and maneuver, which is probably the most visually recognizable aspect of warfare. It's those images of troops advancing across the battlefield, flanking the enemy, engaging in direct combat.
Right. But as we've been discussing, modern warfare isn't always about those classic battlefield maneuvers. It seems like movement and maneuver would have to adapt to a wider variety of environments and situations.
You're absolutely right. Movement and maneuver is about positioning your forces effectively, exploiting opportunities as they arise, and keeping the enemy off balance. It's about using mobility to gain an advantage, whether it's through a surprise attack, a flanking maneuver, or even a strategic withdrawal.
It's about being unpredictable, keeping the enemy guessing, and using your mobility to dictate the terms of engagement. It's not just about brute force. It's about strategic positioning and tactical agility.
Exactly. And of course, movement and maneuver is closely linked to fires, which is all about delivering those destructive effects on the enemy. We're talking artillery, airstrikes, missiles, even cyber attacks.
So fires is basically the firepower element, the ability to strike targets with precision and overwhelming force. But I imagine it's not just about unleashing as much firepower as possible. It's about using it strategically and effectively.
Absolutely. The key to fires is coordination. It's about synchronizing firepower with maneuver to create a synergistic effect that overwhelms the enemy. It's about choosing the right weapon for the right target at the right time to maximize its impact and minimize collateral damage.
So it's not just about brute force. It's about precision, timing, and understanding how to best utilize your firepower to achieve your objectives. It's about using firepower intelligently, not indiscriminately.
Precisely. And then we have intelligence, which is about gathering, analyzing, and disseminating information about the enemy, the terrain, and the operational environment. It's about knowing what's happening, where it's happening, and what it means for your mission.
So intelligence is about more than just spying. It's about understanding the bigger picture, the context of the conflict, and how different factors might influence the outcome. It's about making informed decisions based on the best available information.
Exactly. Intelligence is about turning raw data into actionable knowledge. It's about anticipating the enemy's moves, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, and identifying opportunities to exploit vulnerabilities. And of course, even the best intelligence is useless if you can't support your forces in the field. That's where sustainment comes in.
Right, sustainment. It might not be the most glamorous aspect of warfare, but it's absolutely essential. It's about keeping the troops supplied, equipped, and ready to fight. It's the logistical backbone of the entire operation.
You're right. Sustainment encompasses logistics, maintenance, medical support, personnel services, and everything else that goes into ensuring your troops have what they need to carry out their mission effectively.
It's about anticipating needs, maintaining supply lines, and making sure that the troops have everything from food and ammunition to medical care and communication equipment. It's about keeping the machine running smoothly, even under the most challenging conditions.
Exactly. And finally, we have protection, which is about safeguarding your forces from enemy action and other threats.
So we're talking about things like defensive positions, armor, camouflage, that kind of thing. But I imagine it goes beyond just physical protection.
You're right. Protection is about anticipating and mitigating all sorts of threats, whether they come from enemy attacks, environmental hazards, accidents, or even disease. It's about minimizing your vulnerabilities, preserving your combat power, and ensuring your troops can accomplish their missions safely and effectively.
So it's a holistic approach to security, taking into account all the potential risks and implementing measures to protect your forces. It's about minimizing casualties, maintaining morale, and ensuring that the mission can be accomplished without unnecessary risk.
Precisely. It's about creating a secure environment for your troops so they can focus on the task at hand.
It's incredible to see how all these different functions work together, how each element of combat power plays a crucial role in achieving the overall objective. It's like a well-oiled machine, where each part is essential for the smooth functioning of the whole.
That's a great analogy. But remember, this machine is operating in an incredibly complex environment, facing constantly evolving challenges.
Yeah.
That's why the Army places such a strong emphasis on adaptability, flexibility, and the ability to think critically and make decisions on the fly.
It's not just about following a script. It's about being able to improvise, to adapt to unexpected situations, and to make those split-second decisions that can mean the difference between success and failure.
Exactly. It's about having the mental agility to assess the situation, analyze the risks, and make the best decision possible, even when the pressure's on.
We've covered a lot of ground here, from the overarching strategic concepts to these fundamental elements of combat power. But are there any specific examples from recent conflicts or operations that illustrate how these ideas are put into practice? Something that brings it all to life for our listeners.
There are plenty, and we'll delve into some of those in the next part of our deep dive. But one thing to remember is that these concepts are constantly evolving based on real-world experience. What worked in one conflict might not work in the next. The key is to learn from the past, adapt to the present, and always be thinking ahead to the future.
That's a great point. The world is constantly changing, and the nature of warfare is changing along with it. The ability to adapt and innovate is crucial for staying ahead of the curve and ensuring that our military forces are prepared to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Stick with us as we continue our deep dive into modern military operations. We'll be exploring some real-world applications of these ideas and discussing some of the challenges and ethical considerations that arise in this new kind of warfare. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been having a fascinating conversation about the evolution of modern military operations. We've explored how the Army's approach has adapted to the complexities of the 21st century, recognizing the importance of understanding the entire operational environment and employing a range of tools and strategies beyond just brute force.
Yeah, it's been a great discussion.
But I'm sure you're wondering how this all translates into real-world action. It's one thing to discuss concepts and doctrines, but quite another to see how they're actually applied in the field.
Right.
So can you give us an example of how the idea of shaping the operational environment might play out in a real-world scenario? You mentioned it earlier, and it really piqued my interest.
Sure. Let's say you're dealing with a fragile state that's on the verge of collapse. There's a risk of civil war, a looming humanitarian crisis, and the potential for the region to become a breeding ground for terrorism. A purely military solution, like sending in troops to quell unrest, could backfire, exacerbating tensions and creating further instability.
Right. It's like putting a bandage on a deep wound without addressing the underlying infection. It might provide temporary relief, but it won't solve the problem in the long run.
Exactly. That's where shaping comes in. Instead of simply reacting to a crisis, you're trying to prevent it from erupting in the first place. This might involve working with partner nations to train and equip their security forces, providing economic assistance to bolster the government and improve living standards, supporting humanitarian aid efforts to address immediate needs, and generally working to strengthen the resilience of the society as a whole.
So it's about addressing the root causes of instability, fostering sustainable development, and creating a more secure and prosperous environment that's less susceptible to conflict and extremism.
Precisely. It's a long-term approach that requires patience, diplomacy, and collaboration across multiple sectors. But the idea is that by proactively shaping the operational environment, you're reducing the likelihood of conflict and creating the conditions for lasting peace and stability.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about situations where conflict is unavoidable? How do those defeat mechanisms we discussed earlier, destroy, dislocate, disintegrate, and isolate, translate into actual military actions on the ground?
Okay, let's take the example of a terrorist group operating in a remote mountainous region. Trying to destroy them outright with massive airstrikes or a full-scale ground invasion could lead to significant civilian casualties and alienate the local population, potentially creating more problems than it solves.
Right, it's a classic dilemma. You want to eliminate the threat, but you also want to avoid causing unnecessary harm or creating a backlash that could strengthen the enemy's resolve.
Exactly. So instead of a blunt force approach, you might start by dislocating them, disrupting their camps, supply lines, and freedom of movement. This could involve targeted airstrikes, special forces raids, or even supporting local militias who are familiar with the terrain and have a vested interest in combating the terrorists.
So you're essentially hitting them where it hurts, making it harder for them to operate effectively and disrupting their ability to plan and execute attacks.
Precisely. And then you can try to disintegrate them by targeting their leadership, their communication networks, their training camps, and their financial sources. The goal is to dismantle their organization from within, making it harder for them to recruit, coordinate, and carry out their operations.
It's like a surgical strike, going after the key nodes that hold the network together rather than just trying to obliterate everything in sight.
That's a great analogy. And at the same time, you can isolate them by cutting off their access to funding, weapons, foreign fighters, and safe havens. It's about squeezing them from all sides, making it progressively harder for them to sustain themselves and maintain their grip on power.
So it's a multi-pronged approach, using a combination of military and non-military means to weaken the enemy, disrupt their operations, and ultimately achieve your objectives without resorting to a full-scale war that could have devastating consequences.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that all of this is happening within a dynamic and constantly evolving environment. You're constantly having to reassess the situation, adapt your approach, and make decisions based on incomplete and often unreliable information.
It sounds like a balancing act, trying to apply the right amount of pressure in the right places at the right time, all while anticipating the enemy's reactions and adapting to the changing circumstances. It's not a simple task.
Not at all. It demands a high level of situational awareness, strategic thinking, and the ability to make those tough decisions under pressure. Now, you mentioned earlier that these concepts are constantly evolving based on real-world experience. Are there any specific examples of lessons the Army has learned from recent conflicts that have influenced their doctrine and their approach to operations?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. It seems like every conflict offers valuable lessons, both in terms of what worked and what didn't. What stands out to you as some of the most significant lessons learned?
One of the biggest lessons, particularly from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, have been the importance of understanding the local culture, the social dynamics, the tribal alliances, and all those intangible factors that influence how people behave and perceive the conflict. Early on, there was a tendency to view these conflicts through a purely military lens, focusing primarily on defeating the enemy on the battlefield.
It's like trying to solve a complex equation with only a basic understanding of math. You might be able to get a partial solution, but you're missing crucial variables that will ultimately prevent you from arriving at the right answer.
That's a great way to put it. Over time, it became increasingly clear that achieving a lasting victory required more than just military might. It demanded a deep understanding of the underlying causes of the conflict, a genuine effort to engage with the local population, and a commitment to building relationships based on trust and mutual respect.
So it's not just about winning hearts and minds. It's about recognizing that the local population is a key stakeholder in the conflict, and that their perceptions, beliefs, and allegiances can have a profound impact on the outcome.
Absolutely. That's why the Army now places so much emphasis on cultural awareness training, civil affairs operations, and working closely with partner forces who have a deep understanding of the local context.
It's about recognizing that military force alone is rarely enough to achieve a lasting solution. It needs to be integrated with a broader strategy that addresses the political, social, and economic dimensions of the conflict.
You've hit the nail on the head. Modern military operations demand a holistic approach that recognizes the interconnectedness of all these factors.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. I feel like I have a much clearer understanding of how the Army is adapting to the complexities of 21st century warfare. It's not just about fighting battles, it's about understanding the intricate web of political, social, economic, and cultural factors that influence the course and outcome of conflicts.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think one of the most important takeaways is that modern warfare requires a different kind of soldier and a different kind of leader. It demands adaptability, critical thinking, cultural awareness, and a deep understanding of the human terrain.
I agree.
It's not just about following orders. It's about being able to think for yourself, assess the situation, and make those critical decisions that can mean the difference between success and failure, even when the situation is chaotic and the information is limited. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a thought to ponder. If modern warfare is so complex, if the lines are so blurry, and if victory is no longer simply a matter of military might, then what does it even mean to win in this new kind of conflict? What does a lasting and meaningful peace look like in a world where the battlefields are constantly shifting and the enemies are often shadows lurking in the fog of uncertainty? That's something for you to consider as you continue to explore these ideas on your own, armed with a deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities facing the Army in the 21st century. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep.